Well, hello again. This is the 27th of February 2021, and this is another Auti Thoughty. I will just warn you before I begin that this it does get a bit heavy later on. I will be talking about the likes of genocide and the Holocaust and such. So if you're not into that kind of thing, you have been warned. Anyway, what happened was I've had three very disparate trains of thought that have all kind of terminated at the same station lately. And the first one was my son asked me quite a difficult question. He asked me, "What's a nerd?" He just heard the word on something he was watching and sort of wondered what that was. And obviously, I know what the word means, but trying to define it so that a 3-year-old would understand becomes quite difficult. I think I just made some sort of joke about that's why your mum is better than all the other mums or something, and left it at that, and he was perfectly happy with that explanation. But it did sort of set me off thinking, what does this word mean? How do you define a nerd? I had a look on Urban Dictionary. There were 527 definitions. Quite a big range of definitions as well. Some humorous, some sort of really trying to pin it down. I'm not saying it's not the same as being a geek. Some saying it's sort of more or less a synonym. I remember I did have this conversation, must be for 16, 17 years ago. What is the difference between a geek and a nerd, and various other sort of similar terms like, dork, dweeb, boff, swat, that sort of thing. And I mean, everyone's got a slightly different opinion of what these things are. And the more I tried to sort of pin down commonalities between various people's definition, the more familiar it started to sound. Like someone who is perceived as being very intelligent because they have a lot of esoteric knowledge. Someone who is quite sort of socially inept. Someone who's not sporty. Someone who kind of gets bullied at school. Maybe sort of grows up with the sort of repercussions of that. Someone who's kind of a bit of a social outcast. And it's a common film trope as well. Well, not just film. All sorts of stories and TV shows have the kind of archetypal nerdy character. You always with glasses. They've always got to wear glasses. That is absolute must-have for your fictitious nerd. And it starts very young, even sort of shows for little kids have a nerdy character in. Whenever there's a fictitious classroom, there's one nerd. Okay. I'm going to use the word geek interchangeably because I need to use some synonyms. Can't just say the same word over and over again. Though I do realise some people do differentiate between the two. I'm just going to use them interchangeably. And it's an insult, right? It is an insult. I mean, all those kids who were shouting at me in the playground, why are you a nerd? Are you going to be a geek all your life? That kind of thing. They weren't giving me a friendly greeting. They were sort of expecting me to be a bit upset about that. They were saying it in kind of sneery tone. It's this idea that there is something wrong with you. I think it's sort of quite a capitalist thing, really. It's seriously. It's this idea that you are kind of opting out of the rat race of sort of fashion and beauty and sexiness and consumerism, you know. You found something more interesting to do with your life, and you know, that sort of thing isn't allowed. Um, I think there is also a misogynistic side to it. Um, you know, you do notice with especially in fiction, um, female nerdy geeky characters are nearly always destroyed. You know, they are assimilated. I mean, you know, prime example, the film Grease, that is all about, you know, a geeky girl who is captured and brainwashed by the trendy kids in the hope of finding love, because nobody would ever fancy her while she was, you know, a bit unfashionable and quiet and shy, you know. And she's completely destroyed. By the end of the film, she is a completely different character. And then you get sort of you know, little subplots in other films where Breakfast Club. That's one where there's the little outcast character who, you know, the sexy girl puts some makeup on her and suddenly she's fanciable to the boys and is happy because she got to snog the sporty lad. You know, the highest achievement a girl could really seek to attain, whatever she says at the beginning. You know, it is. I mean, it's not just a teenage thing as well. I mean, I remember watching Peter's Friends, which is, you know, quite a grown-up film. It's by no means a teen movie or anything. And there's I was so quite enjoying it, you know. And there's this character who's an adult woman. She lives with a cat. She's sort of introverted, and she dares confess that she doesn't think she's very pretty. So of course, she has to have a makeover, and I just felt absolutely sick. You know, I was sort of screaming no, no at the telly. And of course, the sexy woman puts makeup on her, and suddenly she's happy. And it's something you don't really see it so often with boys. You know, there are a lot of male nerds, geeks in fiction, but they tend to be left to their own devices. It's assumed that they kind of know what they're doing. They're often the butt of jokes. They're kind of taken down a peg or two. You see that kind of thing quite a lot. But ultimately, they are left to do their little geeky thing. I think About a Boy was an exception. Have you seen About a Boy? It's actually, this is what I found particularly offensive about it. It's a redemption story. There's this sort of teenage boy who's somehow managed to limp through, you know, a sort of fairly average school life without ever having heard rap music, and had worn trainers. And then his mum starts dating this guy who's sort of trendy but a bit useless, who's the protagonist, right? And he develops as a character, and you know, realizes his true calling in life is to help this poor helpless child who just needs to listen to rap music and have a pair of trainers, and suddenly he is happy and has friends, and the bullies all leave him alone, because that's how it works. Yeah. Um. Yeah. this is something that I do feel quite strongly about. You don't see the nerdy characters as the protagonists. They aren't really explored as main characters, certainly not in mainstream media. They are sort of sidekicks. They're sometimes the baddies. They're sometimes the comic relief character. But they're only really valued for any kind of benefit that their supply of knowledge and skills can bring to the actual lead protagonist, if they are valued at all. As an example, Hermione in Harry Potter, she's the clever one. She knows all the sort of obscure spells and the history of the castle and everything that comes in useful. You can't possibly have your lead protagonist knowing anything esoteric, because you can't have a nerdy protagonist, can you? That'd just be ridiculous. And yeah, as I was saying, it is quite classist. I think because you don't get posh nerds, right? They are just assumed to be people who are naturally well, I wouldn't say more intelligent, more educated. The assumption is that sort of more working class people ought to be kind of intellectually lazy, and concerned more with as I was explaining earlier, the kind of rat race of fashion and consumerism. Yeah, you sort of assume that someone who went to public school would be going for a career in finance, politics, academia, the arts, and would have pushy parents, that kind of thing. You don't necessarily expect that kind of thing from working or even lower middle class, so we say children, teenagers, and so it's really puzzling when someone seems to have interests beyond the acceptable range. Yeah, and the other thing that occurred to me is, do you remember a couple of years ago, there was this short-lived fashion to wear a t-shirt that said nerd or geek across the front of it. Remember that? And it was just like all the sort of former trendy kids were suddenly wearing these t-shirts that said nerd. And I used to think, well, you're not a nerd, not in any way. Why are you even wearing that? You hate nerds. You'd have used that as an insult. How is it suddenly a trendy thing to be? Am I cool now? I was uncool before uncool was cool. And it just made me think of cultural appropriation, because I've heard of cultural appropriation. I've sort of read about how it's a problem and things, but I couldn't really place what exactly it was. And I think because that was something that was aimed at me, I realised through that what cultural appropriation actually was. Isn't that strange? Um, I sort of felt that sting of, that's something that you used to sneer at people like me for being. That's a word that you used against us. And now you sort of think it's funny, ironic, whatever to call yourself it. And I do find this kind of weird disconnect with sort of self-defined nerds. People who were never called it at school but have somehow decided that that's what they are. I just don't know where they get this word from. I mean, I've sort of had some groups suggested to me on Facebook with names like, Nerds Are Us or Geek Culture, whatever. And you click on them and, I assume they'll be about sort of interesting science facts and, history and what have you. But almost invariably, they are about superhero films, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Minecraft. So I think how this is mainstream popular culture. What is nerdy about this? I thought we're supposed to be into niche things, stuff that's that most people wouldn't be seen dead being into, because it's supposed to be really sad and boring and whatever. I mean, I've even seen people describe themselves as Disney nerds. Oh, I'm so geeky about Disney. No, Disney is the arbiter of mainstream, middle of the road acceptability. It's exactly the opposite of geekiness. See, that's why we are seen as being a problem, because we, either intentionally or unintentionally reject the whole notion of what we are supposed to be, what we're supposed to be interested in, because we have not succumbed to the ever-changing tyranny of cool. And then the other thing that I was thinking about, let's put that aside for a moment. The other thing I was thinking about, with a departure, I was having a discussion with some of my online friends. What is Gonzo the Muppet supposed to be? Now, someone who knows a lot more about the Muppets than I do. I'm not a major fan. I'm sort of Muppet aware, but said that is actually not supposed to be anything. It has come up in interviews before, and he's not supposed to be anything. He's just a sort of fuzzy blob. But then someone else said he's actually an anti-Semitic caricature. And now this caused quite a lot of consternation because obviously, nobody involved in the show was known to be a Nazi or anything. So why would they put an anti-Semitic caricature in it? And I mean, as this discussion sort of developed, and she explained that this it's a trope. It's not there's a lot of characters in fiction who follow this this personality, this sort of untrustworthy, slightly arcane, greedy, avaricious, and they have this appearance, sort of dark, hunched, long nose, and it's not really recognised by anyone who doesn't know their cinematic history as an anti-Semitic caricature, but that's what it originally comes from. So, I don't know if any individual Jewish people are offended by Gonzo the Muppet. I don't know if it's ever caused someone to become prejudiced against Jews. I doubt it. And she named a few other characters, like the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and the goblins in Harry Potter and things. And they were never intended to be, in any way insulting to Jews, but it's based on a character who was well known, back in the day, when racist archetypes often appeared in films of all races, obviously. There's still this kind of folk memory of the anti-Semitic character who, what was sort of a stock character almost, and still appears, even though they're not directly, meant to be racist in any way anymore. They're not necessarily recognised as such by the overwhelming majority of viewers. It still exists in terms of, stock characters that we see again and again. I began to put two and two together. I started to think, the nerdy character, the sort of figure of fun, the one who nobody likes because they're sort of perceived to be more intelligent than everybody else, who sort of needs bringing down a peg or two, sort of characterised as being quite arrogant and standoffish. What if that comes from a caricature of an autistic person? Is that likely? How likely is that? I mean, I'm talking about sort of Asperger's autism, autism with hyperlexia. Of course, it's always existed. We have always existed before we were discovered and named and identified. We would have been floating around, in the population, unknown, but sort of seen as a type of character who probably most people would recognise, would have met somebody a bit like that at some point. There'd be one in every classroom, one in every workplace. How likely is that? Is this a sort of offensive stereotype of an autistic person? I mean, it's not intentionally made so. There are enough insulting stereotypes of autistic people in the world of film and TV as it is. But I do wonder if that's where the trope the stereotype of the nerd, the geek actually came from. It's very hard to define these words without sort of relating it somehow to autistic traits. Now, the idea of the special interest, being generally quite introverted, being quiet, being unfashionable, being a bit of a loner, being very often asexual, being quite physically clumsy, I mean, these are all things that you know, tend to get associated with the geeky character, you know. And yeah, I think that's not unreasonable. I mean, I know that you know, people who don't care about anybody else's feelings are going to not be particularly keen on the idea that there's yet another group of people who they can't bully, for fear of being called what they are, is ableist, classist, misogynist, racist, whatever it is they most want to be with impunity. But yeah, I think it really is time that this stereotype was really studied in detail and dissected and seen for what it is. I think it's interesting as well how, you know, every parent says, oh, I hope my child doesn't get bullied at school, but nobody ever teaches their child not to be a bully. You know, it's this kind of victim blaming thing again, isn't it? And you see it with the sort of fictitious nerds as well. They, in a way, kind of ask to be excluded because, you know, they're seen as being a bit arrogant or a bit standoffish, so it's kind of okay. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Pop in the comments how you feel about that. And I will see you next time.